In this short series of videos, we're going to be focused entirely on how the notes and the rests of the musical staff represent rhythm, which is the musical term that describes duration, or simply how long or how short musicians are supposed to sing or play their instruments, or how long or how short musicians are supposed to rest until the next time where they are supposed to play. Now, in order to discuss rhythm and be able to quantify rhythm, we need to talk about what exactly a beat is. Now, basically, all standard music, with the exception of weird experimental music, has a relatively clearly defined rhythm that you can feel in what we call the beat. Now, most musicians find the beat by clapping or, in my preference, snapping their fingers according to the regular speed that the music adopts. Now, as soon as you find the beat, then we need a way to represent how fast or how slow that beat within the music is, and for that purpose, we can talk about the notation and rest system that is used in order to represent beats and break down fractions of a beat. Now, basically what we have written here when we look at the different notation and rest systems that are used are what we call subdivisions. So each of these levels breaks down a beat into different levels of fractions. Now, contrary to what might be intuitive, we actually aren't going to start all the way at the top. We're actually going to start right in the middle of each of these subdivision trees, because each of these systems, this note here and this rest here, normally represents one beat in the most common organization system. And these notes and rests are what we call quarter notes or quarter rests. And yes, I am aware of the rather weird implication that a quarter note or quarter rest represents one beat, but as soon as we talk about how beats are organized in music, this will begin to make a little bit more sense. Now, as we go up the subdivision tree, each of the notes or the rest durations is going to get longer, meaning that they are going to take up a greater number of beats. So, for example, if we put two quarter notes together, from basic math, we know that 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 1/2, which is why these notes and these rests made up of two quarter notes are what we call half notes or half rests. And if a quarter note is one beat long and a half note is made up of two quarter notes, we would expect them to be 2 beats. Now, at the very top of the subdivision tree is what we call a whole note or a whole rest, which we can make by combining two half notes together. And since each half note is worth 2 beats and half rests are also 2 beats long, we know that 2 plus 2 is a total of 4 beats, and we know them as whole notes or whole rests because when we add up two half notes, 1/2 plus 1/2 is equal to 1/1, or simply 1. And again, this is a little bit confusing because the fraction in the name of the note or rest doesn't actually represent the number of beats, but this will become more apparent when we talk about how beats are organized. Now, if we go down the subdivision tree, this involves taking a quarter note or a quarter rest and breaking it by half. And this is how the subdivision tree works. Every time we go up the subdivision tree, this involves adding two of the notes or two of the rests to combine into the higher level of subdivision. But when we go down the subdivision tree, this involves taking the note or the rest and dividing it in two. Now, if we take 1/4 and divide it by 2, 4 times 2 is 8, so 1 divided by 4 divided by 2 would be 1/8, which is why we call the next level of subdivision eighth notes, or in the case of rests, eighth rests. Now, if a quarter note is 1 beat long and we divide it by half, eighth notes or eighth rests would be half a beat, meaning that it is actually less than a full beat long. And if we do this once again, 1/8 divided by 2, we would end up with the fraction 1/16, which is why we call the lowest level of subdivision here 16th notes. And if each 8th note is equal to half a beat divided by 2, each 16th note would be a quarter of a beat, like so. And once again, this applies not just to notes, but rests as well. Now, the final piece of information that we need to determine is, well, what happens if we want to represent a number of beats that is not divisible by 2, like this? And what happens if we add this dot here? Well, these are what we call dotted notes, not surprisingly, because there is a dot that comes after the note. And the very simple mathematical relationship that the dot has, each time you add a dot, it basically means take the value of the given note. So in this case, this dotted note is a half note, and we know that each half note is going to be 2 beats long, and if we assume that the dot means to add half the value of the original note here, a simpler mathematical way of representing this is simply take the number of beats and multiply by 1.5. Well, 2 times 1.5 is 3 beats, and therefore we would call this symbol here a dotted half note, and because 2 beats times 1.5 is 3 beats, this is a way to represent 3 beats in a single note, even though 3 is not evenly divisible by 2. Now, theoretically, this can also apply to other note values. For example, if we take a dotted quarter note, we know that a dotted quarter note is 1 beat long, and since the dot effectively tells us to multiply by 1.5, 1 times 1.5 is 1.5. Or if we want to say adds half the value of the original note, we know a quarter note is 1 beat, half of a quarter note is 1/2, 1 plus 1/2 is 1.5, so either way we end up with the same number of beats. And finally, if we have a dotted 8th note, we know that an 8th note is equal to half a beat, and if we were to take half a beat and multiply it by 1.5, we would end up with 3/4 or 0.75, meaning that a dotted 8th note is 3/4 of a beat, even though, again, this isn't divisible by 2, as every note is, or rest is, on the subdivision tree. Now, rhythm is something that all musicians constantly spend their entire careers working over, and rhythms can get quite complicated. But if you are new to the concept of rhythm, a basic exercise that you can do is taking a look at the rhythms below, quickly identifying, are these whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, 8th notes, 16th notes? Do they have dots? And how many beats or fractions of a beat each individual note in each of these is? And if you were to look at the entire rhythm, see if you can identify the total number of beats that exist within each of these rhythms. And if you are able to successfully do this, you are ready for the next video, which focuses on how the individual notes and rhythms and beats are all grouped together in order to combine, in order to make a functional staff.